Okay, is it recording now? So now let's begin our seminar on contemporary heritage of science. And to present our dear guest, Roland Wittje, is to say that he's an associate professor in history of science and technology at the Indian Institute of Technology at Madras. He has been chair of the university working group on recent heritage of science, together with our dear professor, Marta Lourenço. So his research combines the history of science with material culture of science, and Roland has mainly been working on 19th and 20th century physics, especially electromagnetism, acoustics, and nuclear physics. So the history of science and engineering education, scientific instruments, and scientific heritage at universities. Basically, that's all the subjects Roland Wittje is working. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. Roland currently works on the history of Indo-German collaboration in setting up the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras during the Cold War, and is in charge of establishing the historical archive of the Indian Institute in Madras. Okay, so that is a general introduction. I think we can fairly say that we have an expert in contemporary heritage of science, and I would like to, after reading all the things you've sent it, I was very much interested in the question of what was, in your opinion, of course I'll let you aboard the seminar in whatever way we want, but I would very much like that you would focus on this question at any given time that you want. That what is, in your opinion, the best way to preserve like this material heritage on especially in nuclear physics, which is very hard to preserve. It's a very as I figured, it's a very complex problem, and I would like you I'd like to know your opinion on the topics, because it's also very important material heritage to be preserved. So I would like you to now, the word is yours, the stage is yours, so please enlighten us. Okay.
Okay. I can already tell you so much. I will give you the question back. So you're gonna be discussing. Obviously, there is not one way to preserve this heritage, and nobody has the answers, right? Like, obviously, this is also something that we came up when we really looked into the issues. There's a lot of questions, but I will give the question back, and as you know how we have organized this, we will have first we will have I don't know, 45 minutes of basically me talking, but also please everybody, if you have a question, we should have this as a dialogue. So if you have some questions coming up, just interrupt me as well and just ask me. And we will also have some questions within this 45-minute slot. Then I think we will definitely need a break. So we will have some break, and then there will be some group work. So then you actually gonna go into groups in 2 each, and pretty much you will be answering the question you posed to me, right? Or you were supposed to be thinking about. Obviously, you will not be able to come up probably with like the one size fits all answers, right? Like, but I would like to pick your brain, and we find this also very productive, right? Like, put this question back to our students and just ask, right? Like, what would you do? How would you do this, right? Like, and what would be the issues, right? So yeah, thank you very much, Francisco, for this very nice introduction, and thank you very much, Marta, for inviting me for this. Obviously, Marta and I, as you figured out now, we've been working on this kind of topic for years now, and going back and forth without coming up like with the one catalog, right? Like, actually, we have written some documents. And I'll mention them as well. And we can share them later. Marta asked me not to share them with you before. So we've come up with some documents where we make some recommendations, right? For how to deal with the contemporary heritage. Question I would like to ask for the group, right? Like, so we can just start in this. Can somebody give me? Yeah.
Perhaps we could start by saying what we mean by contemporary, because these guys, they come from history. So they have a different idea about.
No. Like, that was actually my question. What would you understand? That was actually the first thing. what is contemporary heritage, or what would we understand as contemporary heritage of science?
Well, the 19th and 20th century, right? The material culture from those 2 centuries in specific, I think. I would say that.
Anybody else?
I would say it would be anything that is still of use in a standard way. For instance, diskettes from the Windows computers. I don't think, maybe one person still uses it for recreational purposes, but in general, I don't think it's used. So that would be past material evidence.
Like a typical, I mean, people come from history. I think some people come from history. What would be contemporary history? How would you define that? And obviously, we can work with a flexible definition of contemporary history. I mean, your idea is already not very bad. Things still being in use. And I've actually just seen people using these diskettes and an electron microscope here in India, because I have an electron microscope that has that computer attached to it. The electron microscope is still very much functioning, so they're still using diskettes. Yeah, they're still using these floppy diskettes. Anybody else? Please don't be shy. Marta told me that you're not shy. I mean, one of the things, and this is what I'm meeting as historians all the time, and this is where I'm setting it, and I've kind of set this here, and this is where the Garching nuclear egg, this reactor that I will be talking about, I think you've seen the slides already, fits in. It is really the time where a lot of the actors are still alive. And that's actually true. I mean, I'm just interviewing right now, talking about the history of IIT Madras. From the 50s, still quite a few actors are alive. People who have been not only kind of undergrad students, but actually come up and they've kind of lived through this, and you can still ask them. And the worst of all of it, right? Like the best or the worst, they actually have very strong opinions about that time, right? And in many ways, you can say, and this is also where you come in with your, it's still in use, it's kind of unfinished history, right? Like the actors are still alive. They claim a part. Obviously, we can see ways people have said all history is contemporary, because obviously all history, we are writing all history in the contemporary times. So we can, the only way how we can look at it, and obviously people in the US, they're very engaged, let's say in the Civil War, for example, right? Like, and there's nobody left alive, but there is a difference, right? Like if you still have people like actors still having being alive, right? Like, and this was also our experience with the Garching nuclear egg. It's very different if you have the scientists guiding you around and telling you how they have been using this, right? Like, and you see also their kind of attachment, the deep emotional attachment with the objects, right? Okay, so contemporary history, I mean, and we're discussing, like a lot of people say recent history. We can say, obviously, it's always, the border is always changing, right? Like the boundary is always changing. When I was like starting history of science in the 90s, right? It was like kind of end of the Second World War, right? Like, and now we can say, okay, a lot of these people have died. And now, obviously, a lot of times what happens to me is like, I teach history of science of 20th century, right? Like, and at some point it becomes autobiographical, right? Like, because I've studied physics at some point, right? Like, and I see, oh, wait a minute, I was kind of part of these debates, right? So what do you think is specific? Can you come up with some kind of idea what is specific apart from that, or what makes it different to look at contemporary heritage compared to heritage from other periods?
Well,
I mean, if you read my paper, you probably already.
I have a question about why do we call it history? Shouldn't we call it here? Is it like history on the making? Because we're not kind of making history from a given period that's already happened, and we're now trying to recall in a classical term of what historians do. We are writing it as it goes. So isn't that a little bit I don't know what type, how different is it to make those sorts of narratives than is to make a narrative, let's say, about the 17th century or the scientific revolution or something like it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm very much in it right now because I'm writing contemporary history right now, right? And you can say, yes, it is history, obviously, and also by the definition of the historians in German, it's Zeitgeschichte, yeah. So it is history, and historians write about it, and they also find it very important to write about it. But obviously, the transition from what you could call journalism or whatever, right? Like some people have said that, like the closer you come to to the present, you might find, oh, that's journalism. But then, I mean, if you go into disciplines like SDS, science and technology studies, you see that the transition is fluent, right? So, but obviously by historians, it's defined as history, right? Like, and we can take that and say, okay, fine, it's history. And I would always also say it's history, but it is a different thing, right? Like, because you're engaging with the actors, and I'm doing that right now in my own history writing right now as well. And it makes a difference, right?
Perhaps
like
we could go to the example and then come back to this debate, which is very, very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the questions will then come up, and I can answer this as well as some of the challenges, right? And so I can say something about my own engagement. So I started out working kind of in the late 19th century, then 20th century, and I was actually engaged in collecting instruments at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, which used to be the Norwegian Institute of Technology in Trondheim in Norway. This is also when I met Martha, and I was kind of, or I put myself in charge of collecting the historical objects, right? Like, and one of the things that I had, and I was kind of very naive about this, I was not going to write contemporary history, and I wrote almost no contemporary history when I was in Norway, exactly because of that problem of kind of being at an institution. And also I had a supervisor from the physics department who was part of that history, and also later showed it was totally impossible for me, having him as a supervisor, writing that kind of history, because he was deeply engaged in it. Okay, and it's not a story that I can really go deep into. So I was kind of collecting, and it was very easy to collect everything up to 1945. This was around 2000 when I did this collection, because actually it wasn't that many objects up to 1945. And I would say in Portugal, probably the boundary would be a little bit different, right? Like, because obviously if you move from country to country, the break would be different. But in Norway, it was very clearly, on Trondheim was really clearly the post-World War II a time when it really became very, very different, right? Because suddenly, from a very kind of neat set of objects, it exploded, right? Like, you have this kind of, if you read Derek de Solla Price, there is this article, Big Science, right? Like, and he really talks about this kind of exponential growth of scientific activity. And you can really see that in the post-war period, right? So suddenly there was just so much stuff around, but also the nature of the equipment had changed. It had become more modular. Like, before, you had this kind of tabletop in physics, right? Like, these kind of tabletop experiments a lot of times. And yes, you had this transition into labs, but really post-1945 was very different. This kind of modular things in the racks, and a lot of electronics, right? Like, really this kind of change towards from mechanical instruments to electronic instruments, right? And also, even though it already started before, but kind of much more black boxed instruments, right? And I will show you, and obviously the people were still alive. The people were still hanging out at the institution where I was, right? Like, and they had all kinds of opinions, right? About what happened, what was good, what was bad, and nobody shared the same opinions, right? Like, there was a lot of controversies around people and projects at the department, and they were still very much alive, right? Like, people had opinions about earlier things as well, but that was kind of more anecdotal history, right? Like, people, not things that people have experienced themselves, right? Like, more things that people have experienced through stories, right? So then we started with Martha working on this working group, and we saw there was a huge demand for people, also other museums, right? Like, it was very difficult to work with this time and make kind of choices, right? Like, what kind of choices could be made, because as I said, from earlier times, you just collect whatever has been left. But from this time, also our department was literally moving, and we had the containers standing out there, and things were thrown and thrown and thrown and thrown, right? Like, and you cannot just like keep. So how do we do this, right? And then we had a couple of years, very interesting workshops with people who were engaged with contemporary heritage of science. And we created a number of reference documents from these kind of meetings, without saying this is how you have to do it, but these are kind of documents that will help you to shape your own policy towards preserving contemporary heritage. So a document on selection criteria, minimum requirements for preservation and access, a checklist for preservation and access, and also a list of literature, list of references that deal with contemporary heritage, right? The working group is now.
Well, let me just stress one thing from a museological point of view, which you said, but maybe it has escaped the students, which is the problematic of collecting. Most museums do not collect the present, okay? Most museums collect what is left from the past. And that is kind of a small universe, relatively small universe. So if you find anything in brass, very shiny, of course you're going to preserve it, no problem. A microscope, whatever. So from a museological point of view, there's few of them, it's rare, so you're going to keep it. The problem is when you start dismantling laboratories, okay, now, happening now, and you are confronted with the question, oh my God, I need to preserve something, and it's big, I have no idea what it is. The people are alive, but scientist A says, this is important. Scientist B says, no, that's not important. What is important is that. Okay, so what does a museum do? And we realized in this work that we did based on the Norwegian case and other cases later when we enlarged the group, that many museums did not have any policy for this. They were totally passive. And they were totally, instead of being proactive and actively selecting what was important, they were kind of abandoned. They didn't know what to do. It was kind of arbitrary. So we decided, no, this has to have some criteria, because if we have criteria for the past, the long distance past, we must also have criteria for now, for the present, for the last 20 years and so on. So this is the problematic from a museological point of view.
I would also like to add one thing to that specific topic, which is that we have a criteria for the past because we know how science developed. Right now, what we know about nuclear physics, we know a lot, but we don't still quite comprehend, for example, beta decays. That's something that really fascinated me when I was studying nuclear physics, is that the standards relationships and the standard laws for nuclear physics are not well comprehended, and in some cases we know they are factually wrong. There are things that don't fit very well on the standard model of physics. So yeah, isn't that way harder to understand what is the things that must be preserved for something that we don't know how it's going to evolve, instead of something that we knew that it went on that direction, right? We knew that the Copernican model evolved to be an heliocentric model. So the model of our solar system evolved for the sun to be in the center. So we know how it's going. So we can have a more defined criteria for the material heritage that we are supposed to preserve, instead of now that we don't know yet how it's going to go.
I mean, in certain ways, in many ways, yes, you're right. I mean, like coming from science studies, you would say you have a discourse or debate within the scientific community, and there's no closure, right? Like there is no closure about what's gonna enter the textbooks, how things really are, right? Like specifically this kind of journal knowledge. It's a little bit, I'm using with my students always the example of COVID-19, right? Like the knowledge we are having out there right now in COVID-19. Obviously, a lot of museums actually do collect from COVID-19, right? But we don't have a standard narrative, as if you go back like to, let's say, the history of, I don't know, the Spanish flu or whatever, right? Like where we say this is where we know how this kind of the pandemic played out, right? Like, and right now there is so many unknowns, which is part of the problem, obviously, which we are having right now. Which doesn't say it's uninteresting. Obviously, as I say, a lot of actually museums do collect from the pandemic right now, even though I think most of them rather collect the popular history than really the scientific history, right, of the pandemic. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting thing. I mean, like if you look at physics, for example, which would also be very interesting. We look at, I don't know, the first decade of the 20th century, right? Like, and we would say today we have a certain understanding of what were the important discoveries or the important events of the first decade of the 20th century. which people in 1905 would have answered very, very differently. And very few people would have pointed to Einstein's papers, for example, at that point, right? Like it's only in hindsight that we do that. But obviously also this reinterpretation happens all the time. And this, in this sense, people are also right to say that all history is basically contemporary, because even our interpretation of that time is different today from, let's say, 20 years ago, right? Like today we are very interested in environmental history, for example, or on other aspects. So that also changes our interpretation of the past. Yes, but it's utterly it's definitely a complex thing, right? Like then I just want to say something about the paper I shared with you, and which I'm also then presenting some parts of or images from. That was really something that I wrote for a collected volume. Marta was involved at that as well, on a contemporary heritage of science, on a visit of students actually in a course on the history of science, which was like Science in the Atomic Age. Where usually for a course like Science in the Atomic Age, usually you don't do a lot of kind of material heritage, right? And I took my students then in 2012, so it's almost 10 years ago, to this decommissioned nuclear research reactor, right? At that point, kind of decommissioned for like 10, 12 years, but it was still around. I can say something about that. That was very much inspired by a colleague of ours, David Pantaloni, who actually taught a whole course. He is a curator at the Canada Science and Technology Museum, and he actually taught a whole course on science in the atomic age, based on either objects from their own collection in the museum or by going to sites, right, like visiting sites. So I thought that was great, and I should do something like that as well. And I think now I can just share with you, if there are no questions right now. I don't know, some people, whether people have questions in the chat. Dave Pantaloni will also give a seminar. Great. So I'm just going to share. I've already shared the images with you. So I also thought better if we have some kind of data problem or whatever, but you will need them later also, because you're supposed to be developing a strategy what to do with this, right? Like, or give us some feedback, some idea. Obviously, you're gonna have, I don't know, 20 minutes. Nobody expects you to develop a strategy. So this is actually, and this is, you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? Yeah, okay. So you see, this here is why we also understand why it's called the atom eye or the nuclear egg, right? Like it's this egg-shaped thing, which was actually, it's not a design feature that was necessary for a reactor. A square, I mean, the modern reactor is actually just a square box, which is probably more practical, but it was really this kind of modernistic feature this building also had when the reactor was built, right? Like, so this is the research reactor, which I visited, a photo from probably the 60s, 70s or so. That was the first German research reactor, Germany being after the Second World War, for political reasons, also relatively laid out to set up research reactors, commissioned in 1957 and decommissioned around 2000. So this is, we will soon see later, this is still kind of in the green fields. This has changed a bit. And part of that was also what motivated to take me there, and my own thinking about how people, and also how historians of science, and with Marta also, we talked a lot about that. Because this is not only about material heritage, but also obviously about history of science. How do historians of science really, or how historians or cultural studies people really engage with objects, right? And our critique in many ways is that even despite the material turn that people claim, okay, we take materiality seriously, they don't really engage with the object in a very physical way, but still very much in a in a language-centered way, right? Like, so we have this this quote from Christopher Pinney, who brings that out. Part of the radicality of the linguistic term consisted in its critique of neo-romantic fictions of the autonomous object and of self-preserving meaning. However, it might be argued that in its material culture incarnation, the stress on the cultural inscription of objects and images had erased any engagement with materiality or visuality except on linguistics terms. And I think this is really also the tension in which we are moving here. Obviously, the atomic egg doesn't speak for itself, right? Like, obviously there is a, and we will come to that, there is a very strong also political history behind that, which has to be taken in here, and that comes together with the objects and with the materiality. And this is what I actually found very, very interesting with visiting the nuclear egg, or the atom eye. And again, also here, Thomas Söderqvist, who actually is somebody who has written quite a bit on contemporary history of science, and also has very much engaged at the Museum in Copenhagen with contemporary heritage. At the same time, somebody also, Marta and I, we know him very well, right? Thomas, we don't necessarily always agree with. That's probably because Thomas wouldn't agree with himself, right? Like, he's a very interesting guy, and he has really been here specifically. There has been this book by Lorraine Dustin, Things That Talk, right? Like, which would be this kind of example for such an engagement with kind of the material turn on rather linguistic terms, where you can kind of talk about objects all day and night without ever going and looking at an object, right? What we suggest then is that the current Things That Talk vocabulary may have something to do with wanting to pay attention to the thingness of things, their bony materiality, and yet keep one's language and culture-centered approach intact, to allow things become actors with an uncanny ability to speak to us, which suggests a license to maintain the set of scholarly tools and languages associated with the linguistic and cultural turns in the humanities, while still appearing to do something new. By claiming that things talk, scholars today can maintain a certain set of institutionally and traditionally enshrined ideas, while seemingly engaging with the new agenda, rather than exploring the presence of and effects of things qua things. Things are turned into something which we as academics that are trained in a hermeneutical and interpretational tradition can relate to immediately. It is business as usual on a new subject matter which still holds out the promise of being something different. And this has also been, as I said, some kind of critique. And this is not only contemporary, obviously, this is about material culture studies in general. So how has kind of my engagement with the materiality been? So I'm just going to the next slide, which is one of the laboratories, again, 1955, around the same time as the nuclear reactor came up. One of the laboratories at the Norwegian Institute of Technology, the Klystron laboratory. So Klystron, they are high frequency, they create a kind of high frequency radio wave that was kind of very new at that time. So we look into this laboratory and we see quite a lot of these instruments and objects, as I said, kind of rather black boxed at that point. So we see all these boxes, this meter, but also this here is one of these racks, right? Like that really come up, this kind of very modular equipment that you see in the labs, right? Like, so when I came, at least in 2000, a lot of this stuff was still around, and we had the kind of urgency that the whole institute was moving to a new department. So how do you collect from that period, right? Like, and partly what you see are these kind of, I don't know whether Marta took you, no, obviously we are unfortunately in the time of COVID-19. We cannot go on field trips right now, unfortunately, right? Like, so you couldn't do this, like just go into the physics department and look around in storage rooms, right? And this is like one of these storage rooms, right? Like where you see just a whole lot of stash just tucked into it, right? And here I can already see there's a lot of this here, for example. These are components from these racks, right? Like these modular racks, which are kind of just stuffed in. And some of them, they're kind of homemade, some of them are bought. This is some kind of multimeter. This here is an oscilloscope. Here we see some a little bit older instruments, which look more like the ones that we saw in the lab on the photo, right? Like some of these instruments here, right? So this is like a mix, different kind of times, whatever. And a lot of that stuff is just tucked into the storage room because people thought that it might be of use again at some point anymore, right? Like, and then also what you have storage rooms and it takes time to clean them out. So things might have been thrown away if they would have needed the space, but it was just more easier for people just to leave the stuff where it was, right? Like, and you find that kind of stuff and you then have to decide, okay, what do we do with that? But then you also have technicians who have already engaged in collecting, right? Like this here is a technician's office at the Department of Electrical Engineering, and up here you see the technician's own collection. So what you actually see is, and this is what we have to understand, there's reasons why things are still there, right? Like things haven't been thrown away, right? Like there's been a lot of cannibalizing instruments, right? Like things have been taken apart and put into new use, and I could tell a lot of stories about that. So instruments are very dynamic, right? Like sometimes things are being forgotten in storage rooms, but a lot of times technicians already take a first selection. And that's why we might even say technicians are the first curators of these objects, right? Like, and
you must not go away. You must not go away without telling the story of Cuba.
Of what?
The cannibalization in Cuba. Cuba, Havana.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember. You have to tell us. I don't know which you tell, Marta.
Okay, later.
Okay, I mean, I have a lot of stories of cannibalization. For example, I had like one story I can tell. So they got a lot of material from the Second World War, from like German surplus military instruments. So a lot of these kind of first decades after the Second World War, there was a lot of this kind of military surplus equipment. So I had some boxes, again, from these racks from a particle accelerator that was built in the early 1950s. And I had somebody who was one of these military geeks, right? And I just had these boxes and he would look into them and he'd say, oh, this condenser comes from that radio station. This piece comes from that radio station, right? Like, so it was all cannibalized equipment actually from German Second World War military equipment, right? So there's certainly that, but obviously there's also a lot of reuse of instruments. For example, I had the case of one electron magnet actually that was rather old. It was from 1915, and somebody suddenly came up. This was solid state lab, and they wanted to take it into use again. They actually wanted to dismantle it, to rewire it, and to put it up again in the students' lab, right? Like, and there was a lot of equipment, and some of it much older, like from the early 20th century, that was still in use, right? Like there was, I remember when I went to Canada, for example, there was in the geology department, somebody using a microscope that was 100 years old, right? Like, and he didn't have any problems, right? Like he said, look, it works fine. And he was working with grinding apparatus for grinding stone from the 1930s. And he said they work much better than the new ones, actually, right? Like, so they didn't have a problem. So they rewire things, they change things, right? And then obviously visualizing, you kind of take them from this kind of very active use for over 100 years and put them into the museum.
But in Cuba, it's very short. I mean, remember that we were looking for collections, we couldn't find them, except collections of pharmacies, pharmaceutical and medical collections, historical collections. We couldn't find physics historical instruments. We couldn't find chemistry. And once we entered the labs, that's where we saw the instruments, because they were using in the, I don't know, when was that we were there, 5 years ago, instruments like, I don't know, all sorts of instruments that were from the 1930s, 1940s, where in other places it would have been already become historical, but due to the context of Cuba and the whole, sanctions and so on, it had stayed in place, reused, reutilized, cannibalized, like the cars.
Yeah.
Like
I could tell
exactly.
Yeah.
Like the cars.
Obviously, I mean, I could tell some stories from India as well. My wife, she shot a movie actually on the world's oldest functioning cyclotron, which is actually from 1936, which at some point was dismantled and was sent to Chandigarh in India and is still running, right? And obviously there would be, and some people make arguments here, even though the political situation is a bit different from Cuba, but here there is a lot of this old equipment also still running. So obviously you have that things, but I think I will just have to move on a little bit just to come to the atomic egg as well, or to the nuclear egg. Then also kind of technicians would have these kind of showcases with surviving instruments. But as you see, a lot of these showcases also look much more like a dump, right? Like they basically put things there. Obviously they don't have the time and they also don't have the expertise to put up any kind of proper exhibitions. I mean, it also varies from time to time, but you see also these kind of exhibitions in the corridors, right? So this was kind of my experience from Norway, or some part of my experience, right? So in 2012, I was teaching this course, and we went to see this nuclear reactor at the Technical University of Munich in Garching. It was inaugurated or went critical in 1957, and it was an American swimming pool type reactor following Eisenhower Atoms for Peace initiative. And we had read a lot of these kind of things, but I've never seen a swimming pool reactor, right? Like, so it was really great to see this really, and see it's basically a swimming pool, right? Like this is what it is, right? Like it's a swimming pool. And this is also what we discovered when we got there. And it also tells you a lot about, if you say this reactor came from America, to actually go there and find out most of the pieces, bits and pieces were actually made in Germany. It was basically licensed by the US, and very few of the pieces actually came only from the US, and a lot of it was actually homemade, right? So this is a picture, obviously this we didn't see anymore. It's one of the very iconic pictures of the nuclear reactor, right? Like this is the reactor core in the reactor pool with this kind of bluish light coming out, right? And also there is a lot of symbolic value attached with the reactor. Garching was a small town before the reactor came here, and it was definitely also a symbol of modernity, right? Like nuclear physics as a symbol of modernity, right? Like which also then made it into the seal of Garching, which also shows you at that point actually it was not very, there was not a lot of protest against when this kind of reactor came. Everybody was very enthusiastic about the atomic age starting, right? Like, and the atomic age starting in this village just outside of Munich, right? And it also then became the building itself a protected heritage site. So architecturally, that egg is actually protected by heritage regulations. And again, here, one of this kind of images, right? Like with these beer trucks standing there and these kind of like cheering to the future, right? A promotion image also of this reactor. This is, you can see the image of around how it looked like when I went there. So it's not the green fields around anymore. So you have a large campus here of the outside of the city campus of the Technical University, with a lot of these large laboratories. You see here, this is, I think, wind tunnels, right? So it's not even the largest installation. There are much larger installations here on this campus, right? Like, which shows kind of the changing nature of science here as well, right? Like, and we could talk about, okay, how do we preserve this heritage as well? So this here is the new reactor, actually towards the new reactor. I think the new reactor is here. So this was decommissioned in 2000, and then they built a new reactor here. And it's actually grown into a rather large research campus, and also it's rather contested right now. So you have actually a citizens initiative as part of the nuclear protests, which came in Germany also, that also protested, local citizens around there protested against a new reactor being built, a new nuclear reactor being built, right? So this is anti-nuclear protests. They have a website, so I took the photos from their website, right? Like, I'm not allowed to publish them, I guess, but I could just, for this year, it's probably fine. Here we have some of the some of the posters, right? And this is part of the problems here that was discussed, right? So radioactivity in the Isar with the local river, but also here that is weapon grade uranium in that reactor, right? Like, which was part of the discussion really as well. And then also here, this is Professor Hermann, who was the president of the Technical University, but who's also a CSU politician, so conservative politician, who has actually been also convicted for tax fraud. This is vorbestraft. This is actually previously convicted, right? Because of tax fraud, actually. And so we're right in the middle of politics here as well, right? Like, and specifically Christian Democrat politics, or in Bavaria. So we see, this is actually this link, even though there wasn't a lot of protests, we see that this kind of politics really started already in 1957. And obviously, if you look at the history of the nuclear establishment, it's totally linked. If you look at Atoms for Peace, it's very much linked to the politics, right? I'll just go through that. I know we're a little bit behind of time, and then we'll take the break, okay? But I just finish with this, and then we can go into the discussion. So this is actually Franz Josef Strauss, somebody much, I have to say, from my generation, also very much hated politician, right? Like, very conservative politician, but who modernized, who at the same time modernized Bavaria and brought, among others, the nuclear reactor, but also a lot of other industries, right? Like, really to industrialize Munich, which was not an industrial town really before the Second World War, right? Brought a lot of industries there, and he was at that point also Minister of Defense, who inaugurated then together, here seen with some other ministers, but also with Hans Meyer-Leibniz, the professor who was the physics professor who ran that. And this is actually the reactor under the dome, right? So here we have Franz Josef Strauss on the cover of the Time magazine, right? Like, when it came to rearmament. And also, basically, he also wanted to have nuclear weapons for Germany, right? Like, so we also write in the whole rearmament debate and why Germany wanted to go nuclear at that point, or why he wanted Germany to go nuclear. Germany at that point, I don't have the time to go into that. But then we had this kind of huge nuclear protest. This is this is where it becomes autobiographical. This is when I started. I was a teenager at that point, becoming part of the anti-nuclear movement myself, right? Like, so nobody's really neutral here, which is part of the history here even as well, right? Like, so how do you deal with the heritage here?
Can I ask one thing? Why the anti-nuclear movement? Because nuclear energy is actually very clean energy, you know, from a scientific point of view, and it's, right? If you compare it to other sources of energy to produce electrical energy, and
see,
okay,
you're not neutral either.
sorry.
You're not neutral either.
Okay.
You are not neutral, Francisco.
No, I'm not. I'm really in favor of nuclear energy. I am. As a physicist, I defend that it's a very clean source of energy. And okay, and we had one disaster. It's like airplanes. Okay, so when an airplane crashes, 500 people die.
Look, you proved my point.
Exactly.
But in terms of percentage, of a relativistic percentage, is very small. So
look, okay. This is not, as a historian.
Exactly.
As a historian, you have to understand, and this was also me. Obviously, look, I have my own opinion here, but you have to say the point is the debate is still on. I mean, Germany has left nuclear energy. You see, there has been a certain trajectory about a discussion. And look, we don't have to, and this is like the difference of being an activist, which I also have to tell my people, and being a historian, right? Like, really to understand what is going on here. As I say, this is becoming autobiographical. Obviously, it might be autobiographical for you as well, but to understand this conflict, right? And as we see, the conflict is still open. So we're in the middle of contemporary heritage.
It's very open, because I'm very open to nuclear energy, because
no, but Francisco, para.
Yeah. Look, this is not the debate we are supposed to be having. We have to understand what are the different.
Roland, send him a couple of references of the history of the anti-nuclear movement, okay?
Look,
if you have them ahead.
look, this is a year before Chernobyl, right? And I remember Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a big thing. And I mean, if you say, oh, nothing really happened, I mean, some people will tell you Chernobyl contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union, right? Like, so actually the historical importance of Chernobyl is much bigger. Obviously, there is a lot of discussion here. And I'm not doubting that at all. And I see that very much in India as well, because as I say, it's still on. It's still on, right?
Oh,
but in Germany, and you
it's
just
a case
have
of
to see
negligence. It was
I
a
can
case
show
of
some
very
other-
big negligence.
Sorry?
Right. It was a case of negligence. It was
Look, we're not discussing this right now. That's not really the point. That's really not the point. This is to understand that this is contested history, right? So the point is really when you go, and I can tell you later, I mean, we will be running out of time at some point, but my time planning doesn't really work with this. Look, the scientists in the reactor, they would be totally on your side. They would be arguing exactly with you. Nuclear science is very, very safe, whatever. I mean, I can tell you, I came from a physics department. I studied physics myself, right? Like in my physics department, there was none of the physicists who was pro-nuclear. It's not that every physicist is pro-nuclear, right? Like that's not true either. So look, it is still very contested, right? Like in many ways, right? Like, and you can't make a case like with climate change that you can say, oh, all the scientists are like on one side of the debate. So it's actually much more complicated, and people have written. But basically, this is my point, right? Like that this is a contested history, right? So here is again, this is the last one I wanted to show you of these kind of showing the debate. Spalt processes, splitting processes, meaning nuclear fission processes, as splitting has a double meaning, but also splitting society. And German society at that point was very split. Half of it on your side, half of it on my side, you can say, right? And it was, I mean, he was, here we have Franz Josef Strauss being thrown in the television, right? This was really kind of what was going on at that time in German society, right? Like, so it was very much active then, and in many ways it's still there, right? Like it's still there in German society, even though Wackersdorf is over, and after Fukushima, German society has taken and German politics has taken a certain decision which way to go in terms of energy. So this is kind of like then looking into the reactor, right? Like this is unfortunately, obviously, so we went there. Obviously, the scientists, they were very, very open, very nice, but they also, I mean, they already had at that point, it was very clear for them for the new reactor, which got a lot of protests, they already needed to have a public relations department. But what they did with us was actually beyond the public relations, because public relations was not dealing with the old reactor. And they were very eager to show their reactor and to tell their stories, right? Like, and we discussed it with them as well. In many ways, they did actually not need to present themselves as part of the German nuclear establishment, because you could always argue this is not a power reactor, this is not an energy reactor, it's a research facility, which is a different ballgame, but they actually didn't do that. Obviously, they were very engaged within the nuclear debate themselves, so they were not neutral, but obviously they were the scientists, and like you argue, they would say, why should we be neutral, right? Like, but as a historian, obviously, if you write about this, you have to write about this differently. Right? Like, again, I cannot let my activism and my politics like rule over this thing, or let's say as a curator, right? Like, let this roll over, right? Like, and I will give the question back to you then. Okay, how do we present this history, but also how do we present this contested history, right? I mean, there's probably more to this than only the story of the scientist. So this is kind of the research reactor, and again, very messy kind of place. We were not allowed when we went in to take our own photos, right? Like this is, these are photos from them, right? This is one of the neutron guides, right? Like to guide away, you see all these experiments there around the reactor. This is the reactor. And then there are these kind of neutron experiments being done here. So we see a lot of this kind of equipment, very similar, this kind of modular boxed electronic equipment that we saw before. This is also one of these neutron spectroscopy kind of experiments that were done here, right? Like, and obviously I could say a a lot of things here, but what we found very interesting, I mean, this was very much a kind of alive history. And this was, everybody said this was the greatest part of our course on the history of the nuclear age. Because the history of the nuclear age became very tangible, it became very material, and elsewise, if you talk about it, right, like it all remains kind of very abstract, right? Like even the radioactivity, because we had to go through these kind of guards, right? Like we had to carry the dosimeters with us. They were measuring the radioactivity all the time. And the scientists were very engaged in the narrative, and we could see that. And what was also very interesting is that a lot of the kind of aspects that we would thought would be purely technical immediately became political and immediately became part of that kind of narrative. So one of the things obviously about the enrichment grade of uranium that is used in the reactor, which would be kind of a technical fact, but because they have been accused to have very high grade enriched uranium in the reactor, right? This was immediately kind of defended, right? Like, why would we do this? Or a question, did you ever have any malfunctioning or accident, is already a political question, right? Like, because obviously there was never anything, right? So it's kind of very interesting how the kind of material and the political also came together here in this reactor here, right? Like, because it cannot be reduced to the kind of purely, you can say, technical operation of the reactor, right? Like, so that's also what I found very, very interesting. Where even when we came in there and discussed things with the scientists, that the kind of politics of it was always there in the background, right? So which I found actually very, very interesting in this case in Germany, right? Like, and we would also say, okay, obviously the objects in many ways don't speak for themselves only. Obviously they speak, they're very important, and we really want to engage with them. But at the same time, it's very much entangled with all these histories and also with these kind of very personal stories of these scientists, which again made it very different from something that you just encounter when everybody's already dead, right? Like when these people are not around anymore, right? Like, and this kind of energy is not there anymore from the people being able I mean, who are very much connected to these objects, right? So I think here I want to stop, because elsewise we're really running out of time. I think we should take some break. And I think Marta and I, we have to discuss during the break how we split up the people. Should I just give the questions, Marta?
Well, our students already have groups. So our 8 students of the master, we already formed groups of 2 before this reunion. So we don't have that problem, and don't waste that time.
Okay, there's a chat somewhere.
Look, Roland, it's very, are you going to talk about the dematerialization of the information, you know, like the archives and stuff, or not?
That people can decide themselves.
Okay, okay. But it's 1957. Well, it was dismantled when? 2006.
I think it's probably dismantled by now. I haven't really followed up the story, I have to say. Back then, I can tell you the problem was, it had been, we visited in 2012. It had already been decommissioned in 2012. That means the fission process had been stopped in 2000. But the problem was, because everything is radioactive, right? Like, you go in there, it's still an operative site. It's still operated by these people, because it's all radioactive. And they wanted to take it down, to dismantle it and put it into the radioactive storage. The problem is, at that point, there was not one radioactive storage in Germany that was licensed.
Okay. Yeah.
Just showing the problems and the contested nature, right? Like, nobody wants to have a storage site. There have been storage sites where things have been disposed, but then some of them, they had started to take things out again because suddenly they measured some high radioactivity in the groundwater. Of course. There's been a lot of contestation of that thing. I heard something. Okay, also the plan was really to dismantle everything inside. As you heard, the dome is actually is under heritage protection, so they wanted to, but that doesn't have to that you don't have to take as your guidance if you ask what would you do. So what they have been doing is, or wanted to do, and probably have been doing, is to remove everything from inside, decontaminate from the inside, and use it again as a laboratory.
Right.
So, so it's kind of an in situ conservation, you can say, of the dome, right? You keep the dome, but inside you remove pretty much everything, and you dispose it as radioactive waste, right? Yeah, and you still run it as a scientific facility, right? Like, which is obviously the kind of solution that you can be doing.
But also the fact that the inside, the stuff inside is super contaminated is also heritage, right?
Yeah. But how do you deal with that, right?
Yeah, all things for you to think. Oh, no, wait. Let's take a break now. Okay, 15 minutes. Let's have a sandwich, and then we will have an opportunity to discuss all these multiple scientific, social, political, the role of the historian, the role of activism, the role of the scientist. We can always come back to all these. But you will have a task that will, stimulate the discussion first at the instance of groups and then all together. Okay, we will do that. Anything to add, Francisco?
Yeah, I will just post in the chat the question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we posted already, but
yeah, it's better to
go
formulate.
ahead with developing a preservation strategy for the history and heritage of the Garching nuclear research reactor, considering that many of its parts represent a radioactivity hazard and considering the contested nature of its heritage?
Exactly. Great question. Okay, so what time is it? It's 2 o'clock in Lisbon. So we meet at 2:15. Okay. So bye, Roland. See you later.
Yeah. So then they will work in groups at 2:15?
Yeah, at 2:15 we divide them. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
It was great. It was great, Roland. Great.
Yeah. Look, I like the story, whatever, right? Yeah. Okay. Should I stay in or should I leave the meeting? Marta, you are muted.
Sorry. You can stay. They usually switch off during the break, but we keep the same Zoom session, okay?
Just mute and just mute and stop the video.
Yeah, just mute and stop.
Sim, eu ia agradecer.
Olá, Alice. Olha, foi giro, ouviu?
Foi giríssimo.
E agora
não é um abuso ouvir assistir às suas aulas?
Não, nenhum. São ótimas as coisas que aprendo.
É um programa fantástico.
Não, e agora imagina a conservação, que a gente não vai ter tempo de discutir, mas imagina os problemas que uma coisa destas radioativa coloca à conservação.
Claro que sim. Estava aqui,
como nós
já
tivemos
coisas para pensar.
Como nós tivemos no laboratório químico ali em cima. Tivemos de deitar tudo fora e eu não queria, mas teve que ser. E portanto, como é que não é? E há outras contaminações. Esta somos obrigados a deitar fora. Mas há contaminação química, há contaminação de N coisas, não é? E portanto, um conservador que lide com questões de património científico tem que estar alerta para...
Eu não lhe queria tirar o seu intervalo.
Está bem, é isso, eu sei. Eu vou comer qualquer coisa. Vá, um beijinho. Pode, claro. Não precisa sair.
Há coisas de arte contemporânea que também tocam aqui nesta questão.
Imenso. A efemeridade, imenso. Muito giro. Até já.
Parceiro,
Como é que é a 2 a 2?
faço ideia.
Faz ideia.
Faço ideia.
Será que vamos ter uma sala para cada um?
Pois,
cada
uma sala escura.
Ai, quer dizer, nós temos os números uns do outro.
Fazemos assim.
Eu recolhi uma série de coisas. Está a fazer eco. Está a
Tá,
fazer eco para vocês, não?
agora já não.
Eu recolhi uma série de coisas sobre o caso português. Eu depois vou fazer perguntas sobre o caso português, mas mais à Marta, no final, se houver tempo. Porque é um caso muito semelhante, em que nós descomissionámos também e pronto, e temos uma solução muito portuguesa, que eu depois posso adiantar. Mas posso mandar depois para vocês os textos que eu recolhi. E há um homem que é crucial, neste processo todo, que é o Veiga Simão. Não sei se vocês já ouviram falar do Veiga Simão. Pronto. O Veiga Simão foi Ministro da Educação do tempo de Marcelo Caetano. Foi o último Ministro da Educação, penso. Era Ministro da Educação quando foi o 25 de Abril.
Quem?
O Veiga Simão.
Sim,
O Veiga Simão é doutorado em Física Nuclear. E é um
Era
dos
o
novos...
whisky.
É preciso, é.
E eu não sei...
Desculpa.
E não está estudado o caso do descomissionado português. Portanto, aquilo é também um centro de investigação, mas o grande problema ali é o urânio enriquecido, não é? Por exemplo,
Mas qual é que é a instituição?
Desculpa?
Qual é que é a instituição? Não percebi. Era?
A nossa?
Ué.
Junta de Energia Nuclear, GEN. JEN, Junta de Energia Nuclear.
Era onde?
Em Bobadela. Ainda lá está, ou seja... está lá o sítio, está lá o edifício, mas foi tudo secretamente desmontado e nós, porque não temos sítio para onde meter o lixo, mandámos tudo para os Estados Unidos. Porque também foram os Estados Unidos que nos emprestaram, deram o urânio enriquecido. E, portanto, esses problemas de armazenamento são complicados. Nem a Alemanha tinha, nessa altura, uma zona de armazenamento de lixo nuclear. Não é? Agora... Pronto, eu não sei como é que isto funciona hoje. Aqui isto é giro, esta pergunta é gira, mas...
Não sei, mas se calhar dividendos por salas, não sei.
E criam salas, deve ser isso?
Não
Neste,
sei.
Eu não sei fazer isso no Zoom, não sei.
Eu nunca, não sei
Nós temos
trabalhar
os
com
números dos outros.
o Zoom.
A Alice Nogueira é que não, mas nós temos os números uns dos outros, não é muito difícil.
Fazes tu isso, crias tu...
É
Marta,
isso mesmo,
isso, Marta?
mesmo. Vamos dividir em breakout rooms.
E a Marta sabe? Eu não sei.
Sei.
Tá
Eu
bem.
não sei também.
A Marta sabe o processo português. É interessante.
Mais ou menos. É da Universidade de Lisboa.
Com o Veiga Simão.
O ITN, sim. Sei.
Junta de Energia Nuclear, a JEN.
Mas hoje em
Depois
dia
o
chama-se ITN.
Depois o NET e pronto. Também é um processo de descomissionação. Também. Completo, não é?
Completo.
Não há
Olha,
museu.
deixa-me cá. Vamos
Não há
só
museu.
experimentar. Deixa-me experimentar as rooms para ver se está bem. Eu vou fazer ao calhas, tá?
Está bem.
Vou criar uma. Vou criar com o Pedro e com a Marta, está bem?
Está bem.
Portanto, o Pedro e a Marta Passadeiras.
No real, eu e a Maria estamos num grupo.
Ah, é?
É.
Então eu vou já criar a sua também, vá.
Eu estava com o Pedro.
Está bem, mas isto é só um teste, tá? Antes do Roland entrar. Portanto, a Maria estava com o Francisco.
Fernando.
Com o Fernando. Pronto, vou criar.
E mi potencial é muito limitado.
No, I'm trying
Sim, recebemos um convite a perguntar se queremos ingressar.
Exatamente. Okay. So you received an invitation asking, would you like to join this and that? Okay. So that's, you say yes, and then we will give you some time, and then we will close the rooms. Okay. No, it's good. It's good. I know how to do it. So, are we back? All back. So what was the division, Francisco?
So it was me and Pedro, Carolina and Marta, Passadeiras.
Wait. No, okay, wait. Before I divide.
Okay.
How long
Carolina...
do they have, Holland? Wait, Francisco. How long do they have, Holland?
I mean, it depends a little bit also when do we have to close this whole thing? Do we have to close
3.
it?
At 3.
Sharp. That's 45 minutes now.
Yeah,
so
I would say 15 minutes. You have 15 minutes. Okay, so what do you have to do? You have to answer the question systematically in a way that you can then later share with the others. Okay, so you select who is going to speak, or both can speak, because it's groups of 2, it's easy and there's not much chaos, so it's fine. Somebody will present. We will take, so what are you going to do? So first thing, kind of step-by-step plan, right? Holland is the best thing.
Yes, yes.
A step-by-step plan. First, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that. From a heritage preservation point of view, document what, select what, based on what criteria, so that you're going to dissect the problem. Right?
Oh, we can just burn it all. No, I'm kidding.
I have a question, sorry, just about the dome itself, the egg. Because but my question is about, I don't know how, can it be fully decontaminated for it to be reused as another purpose? I don't know about that, so that's why I'm asking.
I mean, I think that's what they do. Obviously, there is a decision that has already been taken with the dome, but you don't have to stick with that decision. If you want to blow up the dome, it's fine.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering if it's possible to decontaminate it so that it's not a hazard.
Yeah. I mean, look, they're already taken in a certain way, but obviously you will have to deal with, but at the beginning, you probably don't even know, right? Like, but obviously, so in the beginning, first you actually have to find out, right? Like, what is the hazard?
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, and this is what a lot of times we have to do, right? Like, we first have to find out we are probably not the specialist, right? Like, so obviously you will have to find out what can actually be physically preserved and what not, obviously. Right, and obviously also I don't have all the answers here right now, but that would be part of the strategy, really, to say, okay, first we have to find out what to do with this, right? Like, and then we have to say, sorry, we would like to keep this in a physical shape, but actually we cannot. So what can we do then? Right, then the next question would be, okay, what do we do then, right? And obviously we have to also, we probably don't have endless amount of money, right? Like, but we have different kind of uses. Obviously in the paper, I've given you a kind of decision that has been taken, right? Like, they kind of have a kind of in situ preservation of the dome, right? And they are nuclear scientists themselves, so they know it all better, right? Like, obviously, and they know, and so they have taken these kind of steps. There's a lot of regulations as well, right? So
okay,
for them, it's kind of in situ preservation of the dome and destroying everything inside, but that's not the solution that you have to take.
Exactly.
You can do whatever.
You can do whatever, and then we discuss, okay? So I'm going to do the breakout rooms on this order. So first room is Pedro Francisco. Second room is Marta Carolina. Marta P, não é? Sim. Marta P. Carolina.
I didn't get the invitation.
Ainda não. Vão todos ao mesmo tempo. Deixa-me primeiro...
Okay.
Open all...
I received the invitation now.
Yeah, go.
I'm going.
Pois é, a Virgínia com a Marta Castanho. I know. Enganei-me. Made a mistake. Ai, que seca.
Mas nós sabemos o que é que está para preservar as coleções, o tipo de... Ou falamos assim genericamente?
Esse é um step by step, não é? Maria, esse é um dos step by step. O que preservar.
Sim,
Look,
mas...
if you have questions, you write up the questions
Yeah,
instead
exactly. That's one of the things.
Questions are much more important than the answers, right? Like,
Exactly.
so.
Exactly.
But isn't it difficult to establish a strategy without knowing what is it that we have to preserve? And because I don't, I didn't get what collections we were dealing with.
Sorry.
I don't know what kind of instruments are involved.
Voltamos à sessão
Yeah,
principal.
sorry, false alarm, because I made a mistake. Then I could not create the others. I have to create all at the same time. And I'm going to, Roland, you talk to them, because I'm going to, I don't want to be distracted. Otherwise I make a mistake again, okay?
Look, if you say, we don't know, then you say, I have to talk to the scientists. That's a strategy, right? Like you come together, you organize a seminar with the scientists, and you talk to them and you let them explain what things are, right? That would be a strategy.
Yes, but it ends there, right? Because then we not knowing what we're dealing with, we cannot make further decisions. Like I'm
yes, then you have to find out what you're dealing with, right?
And after finding out what one thing we could do.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is really the preambles.
How would you go ahead, right?
No, no. One thing that we could do, I was thinking, is that we could see what is already preservable, like machinery, electronics that doesn't constitute any radioactivity hazard, for example, and the whole building that could be where the things would be preserved. And what we could do is that the materials that do constitute a radioactivity hazard, they will not continue forever constituting that kind of problem. So we would wait until its radioactivity would just go, and then when it had
500 years, Francisco. In 500
yeah,
years.
like the books of Marie Curie, they're still guarded, right? They're still in one place waiting, and would make copies to show something like that.
Ingressar na aula, né? Já podemos entrar, não é, professora? Já.
Look, you're in the middle of the discussion already.
Estou a ser convidada para entrar na sala.
You have limited information here, and obviously some of the things might not be possible, but okay, they're all gone, right? Ok.
Marta?
Alice, também a pus. Vá lá a uma sala.
Ok, então vou para lá discutir com eles, é?
Pode ir.
Até já.
Até já. Okay.
So I'm off right now, or what?
Yeah, we can talk.
Yeah.
I'm actually having lunch. Okay. So
I'm having dinner after this with John B, so that's not a problem.
So how are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I just have too many things to do. We just, with Peter Herring, we just moved our Objects of Understanding conference 1 year ahead.
Oh.
Because obviously we can't have it as an in-person conference in July.
No. Right.
But we really don't want to do an online conference.
Oh, it's so boring.
Yeah. And we got 18,000 euros from the German Research Foundation for the conference.
But can you keep it for the next year?
Yeah. So
okay.
we just moved it a year ahead. We just kicked the ball.
Yeah.
Fine.
How is the situation in India, COVID-wise?
I can tell, I mean, it's typical India, right? Like we can actually go, I think even right now, I talked to some colleagues, we could go and get vaccinated here.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's a big house. And if you are part of the haves, you can just go and get vaccinated.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's actually even not very expensive, but obviously it will take much longer to get Indian population vaccinated than any other population, right? Like even there might be vaccinated.
India has a tradition of vaccinating. I mean, it's like Brazil. They've been vaccinating 1 million people per day, and so it's like crazy that.
Yeah. But you can calculate. You know how long it takes if they vaccinate 1 million people per day. That's my argument. They vaccinate 1 million people per day in Germany. They're done in 80 days.
Exactly.
In India, it will take 3 years.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
It's incredible.
And I don't even know whether we get there, right? Like it's no problem to get the middle class vaccinated. That's not the point.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we will just go and get vaccinated in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
But obviously, I wanted to go to Germany in May. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I hope I can go like June, whatever, right? So I hope as soon as I get the second shot, right? Like I would like to go.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much my thing. And then what worries me much more than actually, I'm very sorry to say, what worries me much more about India is not the COVID-19 situation. It's a political situation.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of
which is totally fuck all.
And it's not mentioned much in the Western media.
Yeah. I mean, look, there are fascists. I mean, that's the point. There are fascists and they're rolling out their thing, right? And it's very worrying because you have a population of, and this is the thing with numbers, right? Like, and this is what people don't realize. But in terms of Muslim population, India is the second largest Muslim country in the world.
Yeah. After Indonesia,
right? You have 120 million Muslims. 120 million Muslims, right?
After Indonesia, right?
Yeah. And yeah, no, I mean, it's very scary. And I mean, we're just having elections in several states and they're rolling out their policy and you see exactly what they're doing.
Modi wrote to the guy, the Khan guy, the cricket player in Pakistan saying, let's make peace and so on. So how did that go?
Yeah, that's like, look, they're having a strategy, obviously, to woo people. But it's really not, look, it's really not, I'm not trusting these guys an inch. Look, they know exactly what they're doing. It's really the RSS strategy.
Yeah.
It's also like putting Modi ahead is part of the RSS strategy, right? Like, because they're all high caste people. The RSS, they're all high caste people, right?
Yeah.
So they need somebody like their Frontsoldat Hitler, right? They need their own little guy.
Yeah.
Who's representing the people, but obviously they give a shit about poor people and they give a shit about the low caste people. And they're very aggressive. They're very anti-Muslim. And obviously, look, I mean, I can show you so many examples and they're very also the way how it has rolled out in our own institution, right? Like they basically bought over our.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What impact, can you hear me? Hold on. Can you hear me? Hello. Roland? But I don't see you're being here. Oh, yeah, you're here. It's just because I had the break. Yeah, okay. Okay. Just went.
Oh, yeah.
Let's
Okay.
disconnect. Okay.
Yeah. I think, yeah, today I had some problem earlier also with the connection. So I hope it was good that it lasted when before.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was good.
yeah.
But anyway, you were saying something important. So
Yeah. No. At my institutions, it's full,
yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So what is the impact on the institutions of all this? Is there kind of a change in the leadership, alignment with the really?
Yes, totally. We got now this guy. I don't know whether I told you. There's this personally, right? Like you really have to read about this. So they installed this one guy here so this is all Hindutva. So the kind of code word is really Hindutva.
Yeah.
So this guy who they installed here, he is part of that entourage. So they're revisionist historians, right? So they want to change the history, and they also want to claim. So they also want to occupy what does it mean to be an Indian, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's all reduced to quote unquote Hindu heritage, whatever that means.
Yeah, but what about the impact on science and technology and all that? I mean, what does
Yeah. No. So I mean, they're like the typical fascist thing. They're very pro technology, but they're not Democrats, right? Like they don't want to have, it's all leader principle, top down, right?
Yeah.
And there is less and less space for open discussion. I would say in our department, the space for open discussion is just gone, right? Like they made the guy who's on party line, they made him the head of the department, right? Like, so there is nothing. And I have no way to talk to him.
My God.
And he is totally, and I mean, look, the kind of thing that they roll out, I mean, I can give you some links, right? Like it's this kind of thing of, I mean, there are several things right now, right? Like they have put a lot of restrictions on international collaboration. They've just told their expat community, shut up. So my status in India is also, I have this OCI card, right? Which until now was a great status, means overseas citizen of India. Right. They have just changed the rules. So they have really cut down on our rights, right? And among other things, we still have to figure out what that actually means for us, is that we have to ask for permission to do research.
Permission like what? You have to submit the topic and so on to see if it's...
Look, I'm a bloody professor here, right? Like,
yeah, right.
I'm supposed to ask for permission to do research, right?
That's unbelievable.
And, yeah. So look, there is a lot of these kind of changes, right? Like, which obviously will haunt them at some point very, very badly.
Yeah.
Because the university, IIT Madras, is actually built on scientific internationalism, right? Like, but they really have...
And freedom of research, obviously.
But the problem is obviously that the engineers either don't care, right? Like they despise humanities anyway, many of them. I mean, not all of them. Obviously, a lot of them are on the other side as well. But right now, what has happened, I don't know whether you heard some, I mean, it's very much a scare tactic, right? Like, so there was this woman who posted, and she was, or girl, right? Like she was like 21 years old, an activist. So what they had right now is they want to cut down on protests, right? So there are these farmers' protests going on in India.
Yeah, there's the farmers. Yeah.
And so they got some support from Greta Thun. She kind of tweeted something in favor of the protest. So this girl was arrested, right? Like 21 years old, was arrested because she kind of forwarded a tweet on some protests, right?
Unbelievable.
So it's very authoritarian. It's very authoritarian how they do things.
And how is he doing in polls? Do people support him or what?
Obviously, a lot of people look. I can tell you what they do, right? Like for IIT Madras, they basically bought over the institution.
Yeah.
they're now funneling loads and loads and loads of money into the institution, right? Like if you are loyal, like they ask for loyalty,
Blackmail,
right? Like
blackmail. You're compensated. You're compensated. You have benefits in supporting him.
Yeah. And it's hugely corrupt. I mean, but that's not a new thing in India.
That's corruption. In a way, that's corruption, obviously, of course.
Yeah. No, they're very corrupt. But obviously they try to change the narrative, right? Like, so they're really, and this is also with the historical narrative, and obviously it doesn't have to make sense. What they're flying on right now is obviously a very anti-Muslim stand, but you just have to wait and see, right? Like, because obviously the Christian community is much smaller in India, but obviously they're also, historically, they've always been a target. So like one of the last emails I saw, right? Like, so there was this message. So the guy who is working with me on the archives, right? Like he showed me this message that was like a WhatsApp message being sent around that apparently IIT Madras is run by Christians. It's taken over by Christians, which is absolutely absurd, right? Like it's an absolutely absurd, it's basically run by Tambrans, right? Like by Tamil Brahmins, by high caste. Who are a very small group. Actually, they're a much smaller group than the Christians, right? But that's a different story. But because we have a Christian registrar at IIT Madras, and there is a Christian dean, they've been attacking them, right? And I didn't know who was behind that. And then by accident, I found out that there is this party organ, right? Like by the RSS, it's called the Organizer. So they had this as an article in the Organizer, right?
China.
IIT Madras being taken over by the Christians.
It's totally like China, you know, they're kind of under the institute, they are inside the institutions controlling.
I mean, obviously there's a big difference from China. I mean, first there has been a tradition of dissent, tradition of protest, a tradition of free speech and these kind of things. And that's all cut down. And I see in my department how this works, right? I totally see in my department how this works. Everybody shuts up.
They do.
Look, what do you do, right? Like either you resign, and some people do. So the last thing that happened.
The kids are coming back. The students are coming back. Okay, let's.
We have to discuss some other.
We discuss this in a later. All right.
Sorry, are we too early? No.
No, you're fine. Did you finish the whole thing already, Marta and Carolina? Very good.
We just did some main points. I don't know.
Okay.
I think we have to come back also if you want to end this at. We have to. Come back
no. In 1 minute they'll be all here. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is now, Roland, each group will present their thing, and then in the end we have a general debate. Is that it? So you take notes, I will take notes, and we ask questions. Right? Okay.
And look, this will be open-ended, and this will remain open-ended. That's really not the point.
Yeah, I know. There's no, exactly. That's a very important point. There's no, truth to be reached at the end.
Exactly. But it's very interesting, especially the thing about the radioactivity, what you do with the leftovers, the contaminated material. And also, we also found very interesting
We are back.
Everyone is back.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
No, I'm back.
No, you're back.
I'm back.
All happy? All happy?
Yes.
Done? Okay. So the idea now is to have a little bit of sharing per group and then general discussion. And we can start. We can start with the first group, Pedro, Francisco.
Francisco, I'll start.
Let's remember the question. The question is to develop a plan, a preservation strategy for history and heritage in that site that was presented, the Garching nuclear reactor.
Pedro is going to amaze us with his ideas.
Okay, so
Okay.
Francisco and Pedro, go ahead, please.
We have discussed and we think that first action will be to define what is an issue regarding radioactivity, and so that will be.
The first issue is contamination. Deal with the contamination. Yes. Okay. Yes. All right.
Okay. What is not a contamination issue? That's good that we can use. The other ones must be analyzed regarding the time, how long it will take. And so we thought that that material that is with contamination issues can be or replaced by copy or
like they did at the Marie Curie.
Yes, exactly. That's the example we used. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we can use storage in computers. You know.
Yeah. For example, for those objects that are too large to copy or too expensive, we could use digital sources to have them in pictures, in slides, something like that. That we can okay, it's stored. We know that we have it. We are still waiting for the reactivity to vanish, but it's stored digitally. So if it's too expensive to make a copy, or if it is you know, too difficult, too very technical, we can make that alternative.
Okay. So, but now we think that we have to define criteria regarding what is important or not. We involve, like you are saying, the scientists that work there, and so define criteria, and after we can.
Because can I interrupt just briefly to clarify something? So because contamination is not a factor, because either if it's contaminated, you will either have a digital content solution or a replica, the criteria will, you know, envelope all the
things.
Everything.
Yes, that's the idea.
Okay, very good.
So we lose the least amount of information possible, and we are still able to use it in a fair, good enough amount of time. So that is to be able to have them both, to be able to have the scientific problems attained and solved, and to be able to still use it as a cultural and material heritage. So in that way, we could have it both. So we wouldn't be able to look and use and touch some of the originals in a useful time, but we will still have some sort of information some sort of storage of those types of heritages. That was the main goal. Yes.
When you say useful time, what do you mean?
Useful time, for example, there are some elements that have a half-life radioactive decay, which is very
thousands of years.
Thousands of years. So it's not a useful time in my life or Marta's life or Roland's life. So, but perhaps my great grandchild would have that cultural heritage stored. And in 1,000 years, they'll be like, oh, we can use it now. Oh, so great. And they'll have like this.
Okay, got it. Go on.
Okay, that's it. That's after
but you didn't advance on the criteria. No,
not the criteria of what's important, because that's a problem. That's a problem that we face, because scientists will say, oh, that's important, that's not important, and another scientist will say, oh, no, of course not, that's an idiotic thing to do. That's important, that's not important. So to define what's important, we need to it can only be done accurately in larger periods of time. So from 100 years from now, when we are looking to our nuclear physics.
But the minister says, okay, we're going to dismantle this. We already have a development project. We're going to make everything green, a garden. So you have 24 hours to select what you want.
Eesh. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a hard one. That's a hard. So probably the main. We'll look at the.
Okay, wait. Let's hear the others, and then we will come back to the criteria.
Yeah. I think we should just collect, and then we can come back to some of the issues, because otherwise we will not get through.
Exactly. So now it's Marta Passadeiras and Carolina.
So we agree with them that the first step is an evaluation for what we can use to keep, and what should be how to say, stored
safely.
But
yes.
I don't know how exactly.
Yes.
There are laws for that.
Yes, we need to follow the laws.
We usually dump everything in India, isn't it, Roland? No, maybe not.
We would like to avoid dumping garbage on other places, but
go on.
Then we should document everything. Even if we can't keep the radioactive material, we should document them by photo, video, everything that we can keep, every folder about them, because we want to keep the history.
Not just the objects, but also the building, the surroundings, as much as we can, of how it is right now and how it was also. That's the second part. Sorry.
Very good.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, and we also would like to talk about a variety of experts, the ones that work there, but also other experts that can tell us about what is more value to preserve, because we don't know that
because of this contested past, right?
Exactly. And also we would like to collect all the evidences about the history of the reactor, like newspaper news, all the riots and all that history that is also the history of the place.
Yeah, all the context, political and social, that's involved around this issue.
Exactly. And we would like to, we think that the egg itself is of value because of its aesthetic, and also it's of value about the history of the nuclear history of architecture. I think it's important.
You're right. There's a scientific architecture related.
Exactly. There are people that are interested in studying just that, and it's very interesting. And so we think that either if it's to make it a new laboratory or to make it a museum, if it's safe to do this, we need to involve the local community about it to see what do they want to do with that.
Right.
And then if we have a budget, we want to make a documentary.
All the money in the world.
Okay, so we want to do a documentary about it, because this way we can show the radioactive evidences too.
A documentary, yeah, great.
Like a kind of making of. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of.
Very nice. Very good, thanks. Next group is Fernando and Maria.
Fernando, queres ir tu ou vou eu?
Tanto faz.
Então, vou partilhar aqui o que a gente escreveu. Vocês estão a ver?
Yeah.
Okay. Step by step. First, we would have to do the research, and the first thing would be to contact the staff that is still alive. They would create a committee to tell us what objects are radioactive and what objects are more worth preserving from their point of view. Mm-hmm. We would also have to ask them if some things are off limits, because we have to define what things we can use in the exhibition, and if some things are off limits now but will be usable in a nearby future. Mm-hmm. Then we will talk also with the historians of technology to see what's their point of view regarding the impact of the institution and the work of the institution. And also we would talk to the opposition, the anti-nuclear movement.
You mean the activists?
Yeah,
okay.
to also see what's their side of the story. Then we would put the exhibition together from all these testimonies. We would register all the radioactive objects and create digital models of them, and then we would send them to the appropriate silos or whatever places they have. I don't know where
I
to
think
preserve.
I think it's the North Sea where they put European, at least French is in the North Sea. Okay, go on.
From the opinions gathered from the testimonies, we would define what objects should go into the exhibitions, which ones are more relevant historically, and we would define what rooms to create in the exhibition. We would prefer to have an exhibition in situ, unless we would find that it's a contaminated place and it's dangerous. Fernando, I think, had an interesting idea to create the 3D models of the areas that are radioactive and therefore off limits. And we would present these models also in the exhibition so that people could see them. And of course, also have a part where we would present the point of view of the opposition. That's it.
That's it. We don't say opposition. That's more in politics.
Well, this is
That's
politics.
fine. We know what.
Fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah. We know what they mean.
Yeah. So next is.
I don't know if Fernando.
Fernando, you want to add something?
No, I don't. I think that was just one thing that I would like to stress. In this kind of area, there are some documents that are off limits, that are some secret documents. It would be fantastic if we could say that they are not available, but they exist. In some 10, 50 years, they will be available or something like that.
Like confidential documents, national security, that kind of thing. Very good.
Because I think that there are, in this kind of nuclear fields, always is. And even the guys that are testimony of this, sometimes they sign some papers of confidentiality. They can't say everything they have done.
NDA, the so-called NDA, the non-disclosure agreement, when they, But there are rules, the historians can still look into that, you know, because we can do research on medical records, personal information, confidential information. I mean, in social studies, for example, interviewing prostitutes or whatever, social and sensitive issues, it's always done. And there are methods to preserve the identity of all those people. So you should not think that it's kind of blocked to research. It's not blocked to research. It may not, well.
No, but obviously he's.
But it's just so that, you know, they know that they can do still, there's things that can be researched. Yeah. Very good. Next group, Marta Castanho, Virginia e Alice Alves. Did you like your new colleague, Marta and Virginia?
Yes, we like very much.
Good, she's good. Okay, go on. Who's talking, Virginia?
Well, yeah, I can say we discussed a lot of this question. Marta put some interesting questions, mostly about the ethical questions. I think I think Marta could develop more her questions because it was so interesting. We need to discuss really hard these questions and put the pros and the against about this. I think it's a question that concerns not only the scientists, but other people, like the whole mankind.
And the community of Garching, Germans in general, right.
Yeah. What more, Marta? I don't know if you want to tell. Yeah, you have so. Yeah.
Marta, tell us about the ethical.
Just one, please.
Yeah.
No, I just don't know how is it. I don't know how to express this.
Just start from the beginning, darling.
Elise, can you help me, please? Because I just. I think we had many issues regarding how far is it important to have a place saving things that are not
as positive as they should be for humanity. I think that mistakes and things that are not that positive are quite good to get to know, but it's like in life, we should have memories and we should study not to fail again. But how far is it important to keep it and not give it a place for something new and something better and better for the environment, better for the people, animals, everything? Because we also talked with Elise about something that you have a monument, right? And Elise said something quite interesting. It's that, for example, a church, you have changes from 15, 16, 17 till the 20th century. But during the 20th century, there were most of the memories were kept on time, stopped on time, in time. So isn't it important to let time pass through and change it? Because that is history too. And that is important to evolve and to develop something new and grow.
To document and explain,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And nowadays we have we have technology that, and we are in a lockdown, so
yeah.
you don't travel that fast or that far. So we have many options, and we can save it through another techniques and technology and use it like for something positive. I gave the example of in Vietnam. Okay.
Sorry?
I gave the example that in Vietnam they used to use during the war with the Americans, they used like an orange reagent. I don't know the scientific name, but they destroy almost all the forest. And nowadays there are still people that are they are born with malefactions and deficiencies.
Napalm. You're talking about napalm. You did not see Francis Ford Coppola.
É outra coisa, é o agente laranja, Orange Agent. Mas é o parecido com o napalm.
It's and so all the forests were destroyed. And is it ethical to keep the forest destroyed? Because in these countries, for example, you have variations of temperature, of humidity, and this will change the way you study it too. So should I keep the forest the same way? Shouldn't I allow it to grow and change?
That's a criterion, because you're asking, shall we preserve the memories of the bad things that have impact on environment, on people, and so on? Is that
I think
the question?
that it's important to keep the bad memories because they help us to grow and to evolve and understand what mistakes we made.
Yeah.
But we need to find a way to save them in a proper way.
Yeah,
that's right. And give place to other things to grow.
We understand, and there's obviously many memorials, many memorials, starting with Auschwitz, the memorial of the Vietnam War in Washington.
I think, Elise, do you want to make a question?
Yeah, 9/11,
raising your hand.
9/11, and so on.
Okay. So
Chernobyl, it's now a touristic place. So it's in Chernobyl, you have the link of the subject concerning the nuclear reactive, and I'm thinking about two things at the same time, sorry, but regarding to what Marta said, she was talking about health, about human health, not about the memory. So we can preserve the memory, but do you have to preserve the places that hurt us physically and our health? That was the big question. How do we keep her safe and retain the memory? It's very difficult.
Well, Auschwitz is preserved. In the case of nuclear devices, what we must do is that we must preserve. There is ways to preserve it without having the actual nuclear activity going. So we can preserve the physical structures, perhaps.
Let's just hear the final, okay? So, Alice, did you conclude, Virginia and Marta? And
yes, we
so.
that we could use new technologies like virtual reality, augmented reality, and we even give the example because even if we do remove the place and put another one, the replica, in this case we have the problem of the health care, public health. So we conclude that we can make replicas in another place, like it was in the Lascaux routes. Or many places we don't see the original. The original it's remained, it's preserved, but we cannot go there for preservation questions. But we can go to a replica and understand the replica as such thing.
Yeah,
as
the caves of Altamira in Spain, you can no longer go there, but they have a functioning replica, exactly scale 1:1, where you can.
Yes,
where you can.
You have 4 replicas of Lascaux.
Yeah. Yeah, Lascaux the same. Marta, you had a question. Just make it very short, very briefly, because we already passed the time. Marta.
No, just going to make an observation about what Marta was saying. I agree with her, and I think it's very interesting, but I think it touches what Professor Roland said at the beginning. It's really hard to keep a neutral eye on these things and to do what Marta was saying about thinking about what's healthy, what's not healthy. Someone could argue that it's healthy to advance in science, and so someone could have another ethical opinion about this. And we need to be conscious when we are making decisions about that, because we are not neutral. That's just
we're not neutral, but in this case, it's a specific case. It's a case that's very specific, because we can say that there are things that are just facts. Okay, we can say that we have the thing that it has health problems. The thing that it is a clean energy, factually speaking, from a scientific point of view. So there are scientific facts that cannot be.
Enough. We got it. We got your message. Look,
I have a very strong opinion on this, because it would solve a lot of energetical problems. Okay, it would solve a lot of things.
Your opinion.
We all have opinions.
I don't. But from the scientific perspective, from the scientific community holds this belief, right? Not a belief, a justified belief.
Next week, you write us a letter expressing your opinion about this.
No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not that into it. I'm not that into it.
Pro-nuclear movement in Portugal.
Poland.
And I wish you the best.
Sorry?
I suggest Francisco to found a pro-nuclear movement in Portugal.
Exactly.
And I wish him the best.
Yeah, and then study it, for example. But anyway, what I wanted to say is, Roland, we have very little time. Maybe we don't have, it's a pity, but we don't have time for an enlarged discussion. Perhaps I saw you taking some notes. Perhaps you could summarize, highlighting again the problematic issues here, because there are many. There are many. Can you do that?
Yeah. I think a lot of the stuff came out, and I'm actually really thankful for the huge discussion. Yes, I would agree with Francisco that they're facts, but they're not the scientific facts, but they're kind of what is our responsibility, right? Like if you're curators, right? Like if you are in charge at the museum, right? Like what should guide you, right? To preserve this, and how should we not let our own personal conviction take over by this, right? Like, and I see with you, I mean, you're very much kind of like, so if we really look at, okay, who's out there and what are we going to preserve, right? It is obviously difficult, and also then take a decision on this. Should we actually preserve this, right? Like there are many reasons, even if we have all kinds of resources in the world, the university, the Technical University of Munich might not be very interested in having a museum on site, right? Like you cannot just musealize, look, all this is going to be history. as we always said with Marta, we started this discussion, maybe we should look at how universities throw, right? Like, because we're not going to keep everything, right? So this is really a decision, and this is one of the decisions that has been taken, and that a lot of universities actually take, is a kind of partial in situ preservation. For example, in saying we're keeping the building, we're keeping certain features of the thing, but we still want to run this as a modern scientific facility, right? But I think you really came up with the kind of whole spectrum of what should be on the table and what should be discussed, right? Like, even though I think one of the groups, obviously they came who showed the documents, right? Like, it's kind of very clear that you kind of said, okay, we are setting up committees. Obviously everybody will be saying, oh no, not another committee, right? But then obviously what we would say, okay, as social scientists, who are the stakeholders, right? Like, who are the stakeholders? Who are all these people involved? And we would like to talk to all of them, right? Like, we would like to talk to all of them and get their opinions on that. And obviously the great thing with contemporary history is that we can do that very easily, right? Like, that obviously we can interview them, we can film, like, even if we do this documenting, the only thing that I would probably add to this, I think all these other things are very valuable, right? Like, and they can be done, like building models and all this kind of things. Would be when we're documenting this, when we are 3D scanning this, or making a film. I mean, the documentary film is the best, where you can bring the objects with the people together, right? Like, and let them really interact, right? Like, a lot of oral history has been kind of either like talking heads, right? Or then you have the objects, but kind of bring them together. That is really the advantage, I think, that we would be having here in the contemporary in contemporary history, right? Like, that we can do these kind of things. Yes, about the secrecy. Yeah, there's a lot of secrecy, and it's actually not that easy with, I mean, in India, for example, I don't know the exact situation in Germany, but I would say certain parts are still not available. I know in the UK, it's still not the Second World War, the MUHNAC project, right? Like, the British nuclear Second World War project is still not openly accessible to the public. So there is a lot of secrecy here, and we will have to see. And there's other reasons for secrecy as well, right? Like, there are other limits. There might be like personal stories. There is a lot of the archival material that will still be classified, right? For a variety of reasons. So that is something that we have to deal with in contemporary history. Exhibition is a very interesting question here. I wrote a little bit about this in the article also. Kind of having an in situ, at least a larger exhibition, is kind of not working. Obviously, we can go even beyond that, saying, okay, what will we preserve? But also, one of the reasons, obviously, to preserve it would be that we want to present it to future generations. So how do we actually present this in an exhibition, right? Like, that would be, I didn't want to ask that question because we don't have enough time to really talk about that here.
Very interesting question, because people also come to an exhibition about this topic loaded with opinions, misinformation, and so on. So again, the dimension of responsibility of presenting controversies, of presenting contested pasts, of presenting, without any hierarchy, like science is the top and they have the truth and so on. So it's very, very important when you do public engagement with science in a museum.
And for a variety of reasons, obviously, it has been an important part of the past, especially the Cold War period, right? Like, of science and technology in Germany, right? Like, and obviously you have to do that. So how do you present that, right? And also how to engage people in a discussion, right? Like, rather than kind of presenting them with a very top-down story or with a kind of monologue, right? Like, and also giving people the possibility to engage in the dialogue and trying to understand what were actually the issues here and what were the arguments here, right? Like, what was at stake, right? Like, what was done, why it was done, but obviously from the different kind of sides as well, right? Like, just instead of just brushing things off, right? Like, and saying, look, we have this position, or we are having that position. I mean, the problem with having an exhibition out there, it will not be a good place, right? Like, because even you have problems even to get students out there from downtown Munich to go out there, right? So actually getting tourists, getting visitors, getting an audience that is bigger. Obviously, you have an internal audience out there, right? And you have school classes that are already taken to the new research reactor, which is part of the public relations strategy of the new research reactor also, right? Which is a different story. Obviously, they have a different mandate as you would have, let's say, as a National Museum of Science and Technology in Germany, right? Like, and they wouldn't even see, I mean, if you talk to the people who run the new research facility and as I said, present the history as a part of their PR strategy, they would even say, look, we don't have any reasons to be neutral here, right? Like, we have very clear interest. We can also announce our interests, right? Like, but that doesn't need to be our, or shouldn't be our interests as historians, right?
Right.
So what is the role and the responsibility as a historian?
There's also things on nuclear physics and not nuclear physics, but particle physics, more than particle physics. So for people to be acquainted, they're not really bad. Like for example, certain laboratories like they study they study for example light yields, for example. That's related to particle physics, and for the general public to see, it would be amazed to see a photomultiplier, for example, and it's a very simple instrument, right? And I think that would also be an interesting thing to for example, on the Laboratory of Instruments and Particles in Lisbon, LIP. So they have very simple machines in certain laboratories that maybe could be open to the public, and in museums of that sort, and in universities, maybe that could be more things that could maybe join the general public to science, and to make a more, because the problem, I have no problem with opinions. What I have is the problem is with misinformed opinions. That's my problem. And
look,
and, you know,
can I say something? I think you are in a very important point here, and I just want to say something here. Obviously, what you're in there is something very interesting, but I think you're still kind of misinformed in that.
Probably.
Obviously, we should talk about.
Yes.
No. As I said, actually, they could have taken a stance and say, look, we want to dislocate ourselves from the nuclear energy debate, because what we are doing here is research, right? Like, and this is a discussion, obviously, we have to be doing, like in other fields as well, which are contested fields. Let's say in genetical engineering, right? Like, we can say, okay, we don't want to have genetical engineering out there. We don't want to have genetically modified food, but does that mean we shouldn't be doing research in genetical engineering, right? And we can talk about, this is a research facility, right? Like, and as we see, even though the German government has opted out of nuclear energy, they will still have nuclear research reactors, and they'll probably still build nuclear research reactors, right? And obviously, that's a kind of discussion we also then have to have, right? Like, so even though we have opted out of nuclear energy, does that mean we go out of nuclear research, right? Like, and what's the difference here? And this is something.
My point exactly. That's it. Yeah.
But also, what we want today, also in museums, if we talk about museums, is actually public debate. And you're totally right. We want to have an informed public. But the question is, what does it mean to have look? I actually just, because it's coincidental, I have a master's student right now. I have a master's student, I co-supervise a master's student who talks about the Indian nuclear debate. Because in India, you still have a very strong lobby for nuclear energy. India's not exiting nuclear energy, but what is totally missing, and what the establishment also doesn't facilitate, is actually an open debate and open discourse. And what you definitely don't have in India is an informed public.
Okay, yeah, for example, but that could be a way to connect universities and museums to the general public. That would be some sort of thing that could be done, because nowadays the public in general, they don't really care, but they still have an opinion without really caring about things.
Okay. We're not going to discuss that. No. But Yeah, but as Marta will say now, obviously we're in a new discussion, which is a very interesting and important discussion.
I'm being a terrible moderator because I'm not moderating. I'm just in one end.
Exactly.
I'm just in one end.
The moderator should be invisible, should not try to, but anyway, you've been wonderful. Okay, it's fine. But anyway, what I wanted to say is that this was an important lesson class, because probably we will not have many opportunities to discuss these points of the role of the historian, the role of the curator in a broader sense, involving so many hot topics, political issues, military versus commercial versus research. So this was really a good opportunity, an excellent opportunity to reflect about this. And Roland has a lot of articles and papers about these issues, because that's what he studies, not only nuclear, he studies contemporary. And so if you feel like going deeper into these issues,
well, I would very much like to, if I could send you an email and you can send me a lot of articles that we already exchanged some correspondence.
Yeah,
if you could send me articles and I would send to my colleagues, because I think I talk for everyone that these discussions are absolutely delicious. So if you could send us articles.
Let me complete my.
Okay.
So what I was saying is that after this lesson, after this class, you can share, Roland, your email via Francisco or with everyone, because you don't have to, the students do not have to correspond with Roland via Francisco only, okay? They can write directly to Roland and he'll be delighted to answer. So let's share that. And it was a great, great class. I really, really loved it. And Roland, thank you so much. And give my regards to Janvi, and I hope that everything goes well. And I look forward to have a more discussion about Indian politics, because it's not so much appears in the newspapers. Next time we talk. Yeah.
And not only Indian nuclear politics, obviously. Okay.
Certainly not the general ones. Okay, so guys. Francisco, Francisco, would you like to close the?
Well, yes, I think I can speak for everyone that we very much liked everything you had to say. We very much enjoyed all the discussion that this topic involved, and it's really an easy topic to be interested. And I would very much like to thank you for the first introduction to this topic has been so successful. So thank you very much, dear Roland Wittje, like I say on the email, and we all enjoyed having you here. And if you want, you can come in the next seminars if you'd like. You're totally invite. I'm inviting you, but I think I can. I think I can.
He has other things to do, my darling.
I have my own courses to teach.
Life is bad for everyone. Life is bad for everyone.
His time is precious. But anyway, thank you so much. And next week, who will be moderating? Carolina.
Me.
With whom? Who is the guest?
I can't remember her name.
Okay.
I will write it.
But I will put in touch today.
Inês Gomes. Inês Gomes sobre o Camões.
Oh, it's the schools. The schools heritage. Very good. Very good. So thank you and see you next week. Bye, Roland. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
We meet at some point on the 8th, right?
Sorry?
We meet anyway, Marta.
We do. Okay.
With Sophia and Sebastian. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the discussion. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.